Hello and welcome to the Knowing Show. I am your host, Christine Marie, and I am so privileged today to be joined by Robert Lee. Robert, what you're doing in the real estate space in terms of education, your AI certification in terms of marketing, what you're doing with Lesix Agency has really moved the needle for so many of your clients. And today we're going to be talking about, yes, the business, but really how to live an integrated life, how to create a life that is in alignment with who we want to be, how we want to live, and all of that, crafting a life rooted in your why. And I'm just so privileged you're here. So thank you.
I mean, you're the celebrity here, so I'm privileged to be invited to spend some time with you. So
I wouldn't say that, but thank you. I appreciate your encouragement there. Robert, we were introduced by Mark DeGrasse, former president of Digital Marketer, and we've been in similar circles. So in one sense, there's just been so much overlap. We've met at numerous events and spoken on different stages together. And so, Robert, you moved through a period in your life where you had to kind of find your why. You had to find the reason for keeping you grounded. And you have a really powerful from ashes to the ashes to the rising to the beauty story. And so I'd be really grateful for you sharing, because I think actually your story in and of itself, your experience, is a model for all of us to follow of how to create a life rooted in why.
well, and let's start with how we met first to kind of explain the impact of why focusing on that question why is so important. So, our mutual colleague Mark DeGrasse, I reached out to him because I first learned from you through a digital marketer. I was a certified partner, and there was a session that Mark had put on, and you were the presenter talking about your knowing framework. And I remember in the course of that, you sharing not just what the framework is, but how it applied in your life. And you shared a story about your changes in life and your divorce. And at that moment, I was hooked. I was just like, oh my God, this is actually a real thing because it's working right now. And I continued to just absorb like a sponge as much as I could. When you spoke on stages, when we saw each other or crossed paths at those various conferences and whatnot, I just tried to soak it up like a sponge. And I reached out to Mark. It was just like, look, I don't know if you can express my gratitude, but I want to make sure Christine knows that there are people out there in the world, little people, that are having genuine changes or seeing genuine changes as a result of what she's teaching. And then this has blossomed into multiple conversations and,
Yeah.
it beyond the conversations, the prayer you said for the both of us before we came on. I mean, that we can be in whatever marketing circles we want to, but when somebody takes time to pray with you and for you, I mean, that's a sign of a real human experience. So, and I want to explain that because going back to my life and how I got to the point where I needed to hear that. In 2018, I bought a direct mail company because I had this goal in life to be the owner of a direct mail firm. Because for the longest time, I viewed myself as this powerful, unconventional political consultant, and I was really good at what I did. And that was the next step, was actually vertically integrating so that I could pay myself to do my own mail and get paid by the people that I was competing against to do their mail too. And like any business acquisition, you go through challenges and struggles. And I wasn't aligned with the people that I bought from in the way that I thought we would be.
Yeah.
But I had this company and it was working and it was surviving. And we get to 2019 and we have our first daughter, and I'm surviving fatherhood while at the same time surviving this mail business. And then we hit COVID literally a month after we found out we were pregnant with our second child, who is a raging psychopath half of the time, just like I was. And we get through COVID, we get through shutdowns, labor shortages, material shortages, rampant inflation that makes it more expensive to work. And we survived all that. And it wasn't as if we were printing money, but we were surviving. and we were doing okay, or what I thought was okay. And then August 2022 comes along, and my wife and I had this plan to have a third child, and we were about 6, 7 months into that process. And it was a boy, like he was our boy, he's our son. And then just one Monday, he's gone. No reason, no explanation. There's no medical condition that my wife had that would indicate we were at risk of it. It just happens. And it's something that I know a lot of parents go through, mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles, everybody goes, not everybody, but so many more people than I expected go through that. But I can also tell you that the real struggles in the business started to appear because I had to leave the business to grieve, to be absent from one thing, to be present for another. And the business struggled. So I get back into it through the new year, get control on things. Feel like, okay, we're back to a position where we can start thriving and put some people in place that would help the business thrive. And then February 2023 comes along, and my hero in the world, the man that I was named after, passes away in a doctor's chair, an eye doctor's chair. And he had this massive, what my wife is a healthcare professional thinks was a VFib incident, which is just impossible to come back from. It's definitely different than AFib. And then all of a sudden, just one day, my dad is gone. And it was hard to reconcile with the fact that the day before he passed, or the day before he had that incident, the last word I ever said to him was in a text message, and that word was yes, because he had just asked, hey, can you make sure to have what we need for when we come out and visit in a couple of weeks? And then at that point, all of the wheels emotionally came off, and everything. I don't know that I was consciously doing it, but I was actively destroying that business, $2 million business that couldn't survive life. And how many people go through that every year? So by the end of June, I was bankrupt, complete failure in life, or so I thought. And I come to my wife, who knows what's going on by that point, right? It's not like I was misleading her about how I was coming unglued, but she just put her arms around me and said, we're going to be okay. We just need our husband and father here. We'll be fine.
Wow.
And literally, I mean, that was almost exactly to the word what she said, and shut down the business, had no clear plan of what I was going to do. And then proceeded to sleep for the next month, and then figure out what was going on from there. And then that's when I started to recall the knowing framework and started recalling many of the things that I've learned throughout my time as a consultant and a marketer and doing direct mail and all those different forms of marketing and sales, and started to realize that I just built something that was not logically consistent because it wasn't built to take into account what I need and who I need to be and the people that I work with. And over the course of now going on 3 years, I've really redirected my life to be consistent and productive and profitable emotionally and financially, so that I can build myself up once again, but build myself up in a way that everybody wins, my family, my friends, myself, my clients, and go from there.
Wow. I didn't know a couple of points throughout that story, Robert. Having the sudden deaths are just, it's like impossible to grapple with. It's like, how do you wrap your head around, especially I don't know what the funeral was like for you guys, but when you never see the person because of, if it was a really terrible accident or something like that, you never actually have that moment of saying goodbye, like actually seeing them. Like it's so, death is, we're not taught how to do death. We're not taught how to grieve.
Correct. And especially, I remember my old man saying, and he was half joking, but half serious about this. that when he passed, it was my responsibility as his oldest son to just make sure everything is taken care of.
Right.
And that was because he didn't know how to process that either.
Mm,
Right. So how can you explain to your son, who my dad took very seriously the responsibility of being the leader of the family.
hmm,
And he took that very, very responsibly. It was just something he took on his shoulders. See, my
hmm,
parents split when I was 9 years old, and we were raised by my dad because,
hmm.
from his perspective, it was just expected to be, to be done if it needed to be done. And it
Wow.
it doesn't necessarily prepare you, though, for, like you said, how to say goodbye. And it's funny you bring that up, because I mentioned that Dylan, our 5-year-old, is my carbon copy as a child. I mean, this part of the reason I had an emotional breakdown is because I'm not crazy, but I'm an emotionally expressive person. I'm an
Right.
extrovert by nature. And which means the way that I express my extroverted personality is very emotionally. And I have to prepare my daughter to understand how her expression of emotion will be responded to by people.
Yeah.
And so that I can better prepare her, because I recognized exactly what you just said. We're not prepared for those moments.
Mm,
And we never will be. We can't prepare our children for those moments. You can only do what you think is in the best method to prepare. So
mm. Yeah. Yeah.
everything that I've gone through, everything that I've learned from you, everything that I've applied from the management philosophies that I use elements of, definitely has an influence on the way that I interact with my wife and my daughters, and how I set up my business so that I can um, not have to compromise any of that.
Yes. I there's a couple of things that you said, and first, before I go forward, Jenny Mark on YouTube just said, through grief you found yourself, and that's so
Hmm.
huge and inspiring. And so I just want to reflect that back to you, Robert. Like, your example and the story that you've just shared is, again, it's a model for us of
Hmm.
how to craft a life rooted in our why. And so we'll get into some of the specifics in a moment, but um, what you said just a moment ago, you were effectively, by everything you were learning in all those years leading up to the two losses, your baby boy and then your father, at two different times, but you had done all this work throughout the years leading up to it to effectively prepare for when it's game time.
Hmm.
I think of it like an arena. Teddy Roosevelt, in the speech Citizens in the Republic in 1912, he has this section that his speech is now known as the man in the arena, but it's a very small section in the overarching speech, all of which is incredibly worthwhile and a good read. That concept of going into the arena, your face is marred with dust, and both the failures and the triumphs, and everything in between, but that practicing arena, I guess you could say, engagement on a day-to-day basis, whether it's through learning through different frameworks, being in different
Hmm.
mentoring groups, even teaching, sharing what you're learning. It's solidifying, it's reprogramming our minds so that when game day does come, when we are actually in the ring against an opponent, even if that opponent is ourself, because we're dealing with just like this depth of grief that we've never known, we actually have some tools and we have something to effectively aid us with. Like, we've been working out the muscles, and
Hmm.
now it's time to use them. And so when we try to do so when it's in game time, it's almost too late. It's just so much harder to employ these new tactics. So I just really respect the way that you lived leading up to the moment of kind of going into game time through crisis, because it prepared you to then have some resources to draw on. So, yeah, please.
Yeah, and realize what preparations I had not gone through and had not put myself through. And I mean, it's funny you bring up the example of sports athletes, and you look at NFL quarterbacks and how they are raised as these amazing athletes, through Pop Warner all the way up through college, and yet how they will still come to the NFL with throwing motions that are not elite throwing motions. They're just good athletes, and they prepared themselves to leverage that athleticism in an environment where it helped them excel. But it didn't necessarily help them excel at the highest level when they reached it. And that was the example here. Is I had gone through and had these amazing mentors and honestly some really bad mentors that taught me amazing things. And I was really good at what I did, but it didn't prepare me when that moment came that I thought I was preparing for. And I used to think that that was a moment reflecting me as a failure, and it isn't. I failed in that moment, but the real failures as people come when they just say, it's my fault that I'm not good enough. And it's not, right? Clear thinking comes from not placing blame. You recognize what the system was that you operated within and what you have to improve, what that constraint was. And that's ultimately one of the things that I came to realize through all of this, is that it isn't just, I didn't just grow because of grief. Grief made me realize that I needed to grow in ways that I had not taken the time to actually look at. And it's an important thing that I try to keep in mind with what it is that I do now, because I could be a real, pardon my language, I could be a real shitty father and husband if I allowed those emotions to just go off unbridled. And I can tell you that I try to teach Dylan, and this is something she and I repeat together quite often. It is always okay to be angry, but it is not okay to be angry at people. And that is not something I would have said 5 years ago.
Can we actually, I want to lean into that just for a moment. I love these conversations when they go in a different direction than I anticipated, because that's when it gets really organic. So I'm excited about this. Before I do, I just want to, your story is really resonating, Robert, with some folks on YouTube. It's almost like giving us permission to share our grief and share our loss, because so much of the time we're doing life completely alone. And I actually think that what your wife did, in terms of just like hugging you and saying, we just want you as a father and husband, like, you don't need to do. You is what we want. And that's something that's like so hard to believe, that you want me as I am without me doing something and performing for you. And then she gave you permission literally to sleep. There's this biblical concept, or actually it's a biblical story of, a man was just he was going through this really hard time in his life. And then it says that he slept and he ate and he slept again. And then he woke up and ate again. And it was like God brought him the food and God brought him the rest. And so there's something just about tending to our physical body when we're in this time of real heavy grief, and lowering or eliminating expectations on performance, on what we do, like just be, and allowing for the tears to flow. But then, to your point, adding on almost like a boundary, like, okay, I'm going to allow for the physical tending that is necessary. I'm going to allow myself to feel the emotions, and I'm not giving myself an excuse to almost like be cruel, because I have seen that. I have seen where people feel so intensely that they use that as the excuse to then treat people however they want. So can we talk a little bit about that? You had just said around anger, it's not okay to be angry at people. It's okay to be angry. So I'd love for you to lean into that a little bit more, if you don't mind.
Well, when we say, for believers out there, are faithful, and I'm faithful, but I am not the trained believer. I've not been going to church all my life. It's really just something that I've come to understand through the process of living life. If God created us in his image, it means he is angry at times. If we're created in his image, it means he has this unbridled love and compassion for people at times. It means he laughs at stupid jokes at times. It means he teases us at times. It means he celebrates with us at times. I mean, all of these things, if we are created in his image, and it means human emotions are godly emotions, which means anger is a natural thing to have. But one of the things, again, I go back to these rules of clear thinking that I think your knowing framework is certainly a reflection of this. We can't blame people. That doesn't make us think clearly about our challenges or road, bumps in the road, or whatever term you want to use for it, or opportunities or successes, right? We have to look at the system around us. And so therefore we have to understand it is a wonderful thing to be angry. It is a wonderful thing to feel frustration. But when you start blaming people for it, you start to cut yourself off to understanding what that anger means. And for a 5-year-old who's an emotionally driven person like her father, it's important to help her understand that now, because I can tell you, I didn't have that preparation when I was 5. And that's not blaming anybody for it. It just meant
Right.
the environment I was in was it was the 80s, man. Right.
Mhm.
I mean, it's not exactly like we had this millennial understanding of emotions at that time. It was boomers and Gen Xers teaching us how to survive the world.
Yeah.
But I have that learning that I can give to my daughter Dylan, which means by the time she's 18, 20 years old, going off and making her place in the world under her own terms, she's able to face bigger challenges than I was able to face. And she knows where she can get help for that. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to, because she's going to be an angry person at times. She's going to be a happy person at times. She's going to be a sad person at times.
Mm.
And if it's one thing your framework taught me, giving her the ability to express that will invite people in to share those moments with her by sharing their moments
Mm.
with her.
That's
And
so well said.
we're seeing that now based on the comments you're relaying back,
Right,
right? That
right.
people are feeling like they can enjoy themselves in this conversation with us, and then hopefully have similar conversations with other people around them.
Yeah, yeah, it's almost well, actually my friend said this. He was like, "Go first. Go
Mm-hmm.
first and share what it is that has been on your heart, that has been hard, that has been good." That's something that's interesting when you actually get there's something about, the moments of being in grief going first, but then also the moments of being in joy and allowing for the authentic, like, I'm actually feeling authentically really joyful today,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm also in a season of pain. And there was something I'd love to hear your thoughts on this aspect, when it comes to crafting a life and creating a life, because once everything's falling apart, it's like, okay, well, what do I want? I'm not on the other side. I'm actually still in the ashes, and yet I'm experiencing joy. I found for myself that there was actually this hard dichotomy, sort of, but also it almost felt like a betrayal to the pain to experience joy. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on really giving yourself permission to experience the ebbs and flows during a time of grief, where you could laugh and find freedom in that laughter and not feel like you're betraying your father or your son, both of whom you've lost, or
Mm-hmm.
yourself. Because I actually think that by way of going first and sharing what's hard, you're actually welcoming care in a really beautiful way that we need. And yet sometimes it's actually lonely in joy, because if someone else is having a hard time, like, how do you personally navigate that expression of emotion in a time of pain?
Well, first off, coming from Bob Lee, my father, it was very easy for him to crack a joke at moments that seemed pretty difficult. So
Oh,
at
I
least I
love
had a good example of it.
Yes.
Uh, and part of it is just I just think by my personality type, quick wit, one liners. I am a firm believer that the Myers Briggs type indicators are very good descriptors of who we are and the way we process information and express it. I'm an ENTP, it's a debater type personality, which means I just kind of lean into the fact that it's just my personality type, right? So, again, when you understand that you don't blame people, that includes yourself. And so I tried not to blame myself and remind myself not to take the blame for the way that I felt. And I don't know that it was as clearly expressed back in 2022 and 23, as I just expressed it now. But that was part of it. It also helped that I have a wife that said, it's important that you are you.
Yeah.
I married this crazy person. I somehow we met on match.com, right? So it's not like we had been friends for years. We met for coffee after sending a few messages online. And I also go back to that because I asked her what was about my profile that made you hit the like button. And she said, I don't know. You just said something funny. You just seemed kind of weird. I was like, okay, lean into it, right?
I'll take it.
So, part of it is this idea of blame is what prevents us from thinking clearly.
Mm.
And it goes back to there's a book that I read religiously, right? It's part of my kind of library of 6 books that I visit on a regular basis. And it's called The Choice. It was written by the developer of the theory of constraints, Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt. And it was basically a conversation between him and his daughter. And his daughter was a organizational psychologist, or is, and she basically took these conversations and established these principles for clarity and thought. And the idea that we blame ourselves, that we blame other people, that we blame circumstances, just completely delegitimizes what we're capable of as human beings, right? We assume people
Wow.
are incapable of thinking clearly. We assume people are stupid, or we assume people are bad. We have to begin with the assumption that we're good. Otherwise, we're not really living up to the human emotions that we were gifted, that are created in God's image. Because what does he assume? He assumes he created good people. Yes, they make mistakes. But the lesson here for all of us is that grace is a reflection that you could be an amazing person, as imperfect as you are. And just how simple is that to think that way, right? Again, I'm not saying that when all of that happened in my life, that I was thinking as clearly as I am now. But I can tell you, it's just so much simpler to approach life and business relationships when we just don't blame one another. It makes it simple. It makes it clear. It makes it easy for us to ask questions that are insightful,
Yes.
to obtain information that is treated as an investigation and not an inquisition. I mean, there's just so many ways that life simplifies when we think clearly, and
Yeah.
that includes the grieving process, right? It's just accepting that it's a real part of life.
I really appreciate, actually, before I continue, Axel Simon joined us on LinkedIn, and he was saying he enjoyed your talk and he has to go. But Simon, or Axel, we love you. Thank you for joining.
Yes, we do. Very much so.
um, you mentioned this earlier, and I just want to circle back to it. You mentioned how grief can be a mirror for us. And that is a fundamental narrative and approach to life, that I am actually going to set the dials through which I view the world, and consider now that everything is a mirror to me, about me, and I get to learn and grow and love better as a result. And that does not mean that it's always about us. So there's again, with dichotomy, it's like grief and joy, lessons and taking radical responsibility and letting go. It's the duality of holding two extremes and having the conjunction and connecting them that is a really, really hard balance. It's so much easier for me to be all one way than allowing for the other aspect that really does add balance. It's like 2 balances on a scale. And so I really appreciate that perspective, Robert, because what it does is that we reclaim our power. For so long as we are blaming others, we are actually giving our power away. And we actually are freely affording someone else the power to make us angry, to make us reactive. You know what I mean? And now we all of a sudden have everyone else as the cause for why our life is looking the way it is, rather than Viktor Frankl wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning while he was in Auschwitz, and he was a psychologist back in World War II. And he says between stimulus and response is choice, and so that choice between every single in between, like before we ever make a response, every single time we have choice. And he even said in that same book, you can take away every single human freedom except for choice. That's mine. I get the power to choose how I respond. And recognizing that it's a reclamation of the power which we once gave away through blame. But in so doing, we also stand to bear the responsibility for our choices. And so in one sense, it's like, am I willing to stop blaming and take my power back, but then also take responsibility for the choice that I do make, regardless of the consequences, the good and the bad, and everything in between. And so I really appreciate that it's a reframe. It really is a reframe that in this grief, like Jenny said earlier, you come to find yourself. You really, really do. You come to, if you're willing to look in the mirror and see what grief, anger, and everything else in between has to show us as we examine who we are.
Well said. Couldn't say it any better than that. I don't think I said it that well, to be honest with you. So,
well, I mean, what you said, frankly, it's so important that we remember the power that we have. I wrote down the book, The Choice, so I'm going to go read that.
Good, yeah, please.
I'm excited about that. I just wanted to go in a direction, if you're up for it, regarding crafting a life. So on the heels of, you said you slept for like a month. And your wife just gave you so much space too. And I'm sure she took up space as well to grieve as she did, but it was your father who died, so she really was giving you space for that. What next? Like in terms of kind of that first step, was it actually returning to some of those narratives and some of those things you had learned? Was that kind of the first step? Was it journaling? Like, what did you do kind of to get you to the next step of re-engaging?
Yeah. So it was really sitting down and understanding what my goal really was. And the simplicity of the reality in the life that we live, and living a good life, comes down to understanding the goal and the requirements that you have to meet that goal. And there's only one goal. And so from a personal perspective, my goal in life is to be a happy present father. And I needed to identify that goal before anything else. See, people tend to overcomplicate their life by saying, I want to do this year, and I want to do that this year, and I have these New Year's resolutions, and then none of them are ever met. Whereas I have a pretty consistent goal, and that is, it doesn't matter the day that it exists, it doesn't matter the month, the year, whatever. Being a happy present father is the goal of my life. And then once I identified that goal, then I was able to identify the two requirements that I have to meet that goal. Because I can go out there and do a ton of stuff to be happy and present. But that meant I had to be home with my wife and girls as much as I humanly can. I have to be home, not on the phone, not ask me a question. I have to be home. I have to be present. But it also meant that I had to be in an environment where I could express my personality. And that meant, as an extrovert, being with people where I could talk and converse and debate and, not argue, not blame, anything like that. But I just had to be out doing what I do because it's just what makes me happy. And once I identified those requirements in that goal, I started to then say, well, what is that? What do I assume that means I have to do?
Yeah.
Well, to be a happy present, or to be a present father, that means I have to be nowhere else but home. And to be an outgoing, extroverted person that talks with other people like this, or in person at conferences like we talked about before, that means I have to not be home. And so for me, it became pretty simple. I can't meet that goal without those two requirements being met. So I have to figure out how to be home as much as I can and be present in other places at the same time. So then my business decisions, my life decisions actually became pretty easy because that knocked out about 90% of the stuff that I could potentially do.
Wow.
And then I focused on choosing the best of that 10% to rebuild my business and rebuild my life and rebuild my focus. And it
Mm,
became very simple at that point. And then that's where I created my 90-minute marketing department and partnered with people in the real estate industry to travel to conferences and teach and still be here
I love
to be
that.
the most happy present father possible. And it doesn't get more complicated than that. I mean, it's pretty simple, right? Doesn't
Yeah,
meet those three requirements and help me meet my goal. I don't do it. Pure and
right.
simple.
So I'm actually pulling up your Facebook right now because this morning I was checking out your profile in preparation for our chat. And Robert, you have something here that I love. I hope that this is you. Here you go. You say on your banner, we have only so many minutes in a day and so many days in a lifetime. So build a business that gives you the most time possible with what you love the most. I love that.
Thank you.
I really do. When I turned 30, I wrote my eulogy. And that was a big mirror moment of who do I want to be? How do I want to live? And then the question is, okay, well, then how am I going to get there? And am I living today on track to be that person, to do those things, to have that impact? And then wherever there's misalignment, I either need to change my belief, what I'm saying I want, or change my behavior, how I'm living in the present. So something is unreconciled, and to bring it into reconciliation, to bring it into alignment, something has to give. And then the question is, I think it's actually starting with, how do I want to show up? But at the end of the day, it's like, what do I want? Who do I feel called to be? Who do I want to be? Asking that question of what we want, it's actually a really exciting thing to consider, because in so many ways we do get what we want, whether we are conscious about it or not. And so, there's something around the self-fulfilling prophecy of what you speak out and the power of your word, and what are we actually speaking out about ourselves and about our life. I took my eulogy and I turned it into first person present tense, and I read that every day for a year, like I am, and then continued out with who I wanted to be, but really kind of training my mind that this is who Christine Marie is going to function as. So I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Well, as I hear you say that, it explains to me why I was so attracted to the knowing framework from the first time
Mm,
I heard it, because it is a logically consistent framework. And what you've essentially explained is that you take a very scientific approach to the way that you analyze, which seems like it's not emotion, but I'll touch on that here in a second. But it's a very scientific approach. And one of the other principles of clear thinking is that there is no such thing as conflict or compromise. You see,
mm,
oftentimes what we try to do is split the difference, figure out how we can each have a little bit of what it is that we want, rather than questioning the assumptions of what we're demanding to understand why that conflict exists. Because there is no solution that works between more than one person if it's built off compromise that doesn't question those assumptions. And that's true for how it is that we compromise with ourselves. We have to question the assumptions of we are making about what we want, why we want it. That question of why, right? To go back to the title of this session, you craft a life rooted in why. Ask yourself why we do what we do, why we assume what we assume. For my real estate clients, I point it to them this way: if you have two surveyors that go out there and measure the property line and they come up with a different answer, you don't split the difference. You don't sit there and say, well, that marker's over there and that marker's over there, so we're just going to draw the property line. No, it's a legal description of a property. You have to figure out why one of those measurements were off. And so when we go back to the requirements that we have to meet our goal, we have to question the assumptions of why we have that necessary requirement, why there's a conflict with the other necessary requirement, why we assume we can't do something to resolve that dissonance. it's a very scientific approach. Your knowing framework is a very scientific approach to writing that eulogy or being a happy present father, whatever it is.
Mhm. So
You have to analyze, like, that's the hard work. It's
good.
very simple, but it is so hard, and we seem to excuse for ourselves and other people. You want to do things that are easy, but end up being extremely complex, which just makes them harder in the end, rather than just saying, you want to be an elite athlete, to go back to that analogy, do the simple things, practice them over and over and over again, but don't vary from the
Mm,
simplicity. Put in the hard work to ask yourself those questions. And
mm,
ultimately, we're going to understand why we get angry, what we get angry at, what we get happy with, why we consider people our friends, why we consider people our enemies, and why might it not be a good idea to consider people enemies? They're just not friends, or whatever it might be, right?
yeah.
All of this is just rooted in this concept of clarity.
Hmm.
And again, to go back to your knowing framework and why it was so influential on me, it provided clarity at a moment where I had no clarity about what the hell was going on in my life or
Yeah.
why I had gotten to that point.
Yeah.
It was the first step, and it was very consistent with what it is that I've built to now. And
Mm.
it just doesn't get more complicated than that.
I love that you said what got me here to this point, like that's where, to your point, it's simple. Like, how did you get here? So who were you? What was that whole process like? How were you raised? What was the past? How does
Mhm,
the past show up in the present? But it takes time. It
mhm.
takes time. It takes the work to go and analyze. What's your history? What is the through lines in your life, and how do they manifest today in the present? So I would, if you don't mind, Robert, I'd love to hear your take on the knowing framework, if you're willing, um, just to kind of share to people what is that.
So, if for me, I have called it an emotional flywheel.
Mm,
And I mentioned I would come back to this, and this is, I think, the appropriate place to say it. But our decision making is influenced by our intuition. We intuitively make decisions about what is good and what is bad, but that intuition is influenced by our emotions. So our decision making has a logical process from being expressed here, but coming from here.
hmm,
And those experiences we have in our life influence our emotion, which then influences our experience. So, from my perspective, the knowing framework is the flywheel that
mm,
continually allows us to build better to intuition, emotional intuition. And so it takes a lot of energy to start the flywheel because it's heavy. I mean, emotions are heavy things,
right. Mm,
which means when you start with that first step of saying what you need and the experience that brought you to what you need and what you do as a result of that, it gives somebody the permission to say the same thing, what they
mm,
need and why they need it and what they experienced, which then gives each of us an opportunity to relate that experience to our experience, which builds a deeper emotional bond because we understand the why of somebody's decision making.
yes.
And it, like a flywheel, takes a lot of energy at first, but once it gets spinning,
Mm,
man, it keeps that engine running. And it spins faster and faster with less and less energy. And again, it's very logical. It just makes intuitive sense
mm,
the way that you explained it. So again, authenticity, resonance, uh, empathy,
yeah.
and feeling, right? Those four stages that are not really stages because it's not a linear path.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, so good. So good, and to your point, and, pulling on the experience thread, what have you lived? Folks are I've said this for 2026, my prediction is that experience is going to be of greater value than ever before because people want to do business with people. They want to engage in life, where I was just chatting with Ryan Stewman, who, big lender, investor, author. And he was sharing so much of what he said. The podcast will be released in a week or so, but almost everything he said was rooted in experience, just telling stories. And, all of us are captivated by stories, and our life is a story that we get to create if we so choose. And if we are awake, the definition of emotional intelligence is to be aware, understand, and then express one's emotions, and then to engage in interpersonal relationships judiciously and with empathy. But we cannot do the latter well until we have taken full responsibility for ourselves. And after personal responsibility, we can engage with others. And so much of that first part is in the awareness and the understanding is what has happened, what has been my experience. And then the more we understand our own experience, the more we can come from an authentic place and then engage with others with empathy. Otherwise, empathy quickly becomes codependence if it's not rooted in authenticity. And
100%.
vice versa, authenticity can quickly become narcissism if it's not resulting in empathy. And so, even to this whole point of experience, I've had so many people here in the chat being like, is this AI? Was this scheduled? Is this live? Which we are. Hello, everybody. But everyone, we're all wanting, I want to know, is this real? Am I engaging with a real person? Or is this, and it's funny because when it's not rooted in experience, it does lessen the trust factor. And thus it lessens connection. And man, are we hungry for connection more than ever before. So how you're raising your daughter, Robert, to understand her emotions, to be emotionally intelligent. It's really so critical. She's got up until 7, I think Jesuits say, like, give me a kid until they're 7 and then he's set for the rest of his life on what he's going to believe. That's so true, in so many ways. So many of us, our years 0 to 7 are so incredibly formative. So if we don't take the time to analyze what happened during those years, we live life with someone else's inherited lens, with someone else's inherited narratives around and about the world. So the way that you're teaching your daughter to engage with her emotions, to know what's happening for herself, and to live consciously at 5, how cool is that? And I'd love to hear, as we kind of wrap this up, the emotions are not supposed to be the ones at the helm. And you said this, your thoughts, it's about bringing the right and left hemisphere of the brain to work in concert together. So how do you then encourage her? She does have big emotions. What happens next after she gives herself permission to feel them?
Basically, go feel them. And then when you can communicate with us, then come back and we'll talk about it. Right.
I love
because
that.
It doesn't matter that you're 5. I need to know why the hell you're acting like a fool. Yeah, I just do. She's an absolute nutcase. And it's funny you bring up AI, because part of the lesson of the AI that I give all of these real estate agents that we work with when we're teaching CE classes or we're doing consulting sessions is you can't use AI as a technology. It's just a tool to augment your human experience with other people. And the way that I express that is I can't go to my daughter and look at her and prompt her to act rationally. I can't look at her and say, I want you to imagine that you're a trained psychoanalyst that's in your mid-30s and has 15 years of professional experience in the industry. I have to look at her and say, what the fuck is wrong with you right now? And that's what she responds to.
Yeah.
Right? But I have to be, but that's what humans respond to. I don't want to say her, because we also have her sister, who is very much like my wife. I mean, there is emotional needs there as well. There is emotional expression with her as well. She's just night and day different from her sister. Her sister's like me, a little bit of a nutcase outwardly, but when she gets through it, she moves on to the next feeling. Whereas my wife, who is Cuban, right? So comes from that Cuban background and has a father who was raised as an expat, a Cuban expat, right? They're very emotionally stoic outwards, but they're a raging tempest on the inside. And there has to be moments where they express that as well. So we do the same thing for both of our girls. Understand be in your feelings. And when you're ready to communicate those feelings back so we can understand why you have those feelings, then you can talk to us. But screaming at us is just being angry at us. And I'm not gonna get screamed at by a 5-year-old all the time or a
Some
7-year-old all the time.
right.
Right. Some of the times I would like to, not be screamed at, but I will say this about both my girls too. And this matches my wife and I think matches me, right? All four of us are pretty consistent with this. Um, we express our affection for each other in very different ways, but it is consistent. It is
I love
repeated. Um, my younger daughter, Dylan, will run in the house and just give me a hug that she doesn't let go from.
that.
Whereas my elder daughter, Blake, will just randomly, out of nowhere, say, "You're the best dad I've ever had." Right? Which is kind of funny in and of itself.
Oh.
But she will just randomly say, "I love you, Dad. You're the best." And then go off and do what she does, which is very, very much like my wife. I mean, she will do things like that very, very randomly, but very, very purposefully.
Yeah.
And we just let each other be in our feels and the way we are. And I think we appreciate that about one another. And that's what makes a really kick-ass family that raises their girls to go out and be really kick-ass people in their own right.
I love that. Robert, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for you being here. Someone asked here in the chat, where are you guys from? Robert, do you live in Georgia, Atlanta?
Yeah. So my wife was born and raised here. My girls are born and raised here. I'm probably one of the 17 people that grew up in the state of Wyoming and actually can communicate what that's like. But I grew up in Cheyenne, Wyoming. So
okay, nice.
There are two types of people in Cheyenne. There are ranchers and then everybody else. And we were part of the everybody else that my grandparents were bar owners. My old man was the best damn car salesman in the world. And so there's an explanation as to why I'm a crazy person, because I come from crazy people. So.
I think everyone here has enjoyed the conversation, with a few outliers, but their choice to stick around if they didn't like it. Sun Moon says he's from Toronto, Canada, the 51st state. I love it.
I will never support Canada because their hockey team stands in front of our hockey team during the Winter Olympics. And I think there'd be a pretty good fight that I get my ass kicked in if I tried to tell a Canadian that you're now part of the U.S. hockey team. So.
That's such a good point. Oh my gosh.
I mean, I'm a big dude, but I ain't built like a hockey player, and I ain't about to get my ass kicked by one. So
I know. I'm like, let me stay out of that. Oh my gosh. Someone here said, the Dread Pirate. Oh, Rob. Oh, good to see you again. He said we need to normalize that more, more of these younger generations do regarding emotions. I think that's what you're talking about. It's so important, and emotions with boundaries. Like the way that you've done this with your girls is really important, because I think I've seen it too much on the other side, where it's whatever you want and there's no boundaries. And frankly, children and all of us thrive within confines of structure that, the feeling of autonomy is so important for development neurologically, but also knowing that the whole family and the mood of the whole family doesn't revolve around you. That's so destabilizing that a 5-year-old could hijack the entire family dinner and hijack the entire family vacation. And it's like, don't worry, you don't have that much power, but we want to hear from you. We love you. Again, the power of my therapist told me that probably 3 years ago. And that was one of the most important little lessons I could learn, is the conjunction and to allow for two very opposing extremes to coexist, allowing for the duality there. So thank you so much, Robert. I'm so grateful for you. How can people learn more about you, work with you?
Yeah. So my link tree is rob.lesix.com. That's rob.lesix.com. Connect me to me on my various social channels, and you can connect with my company, the Lesix Agency. That's where we actually help people figure out how to make more money in less time using clear thinking and clear expression of emotion in their business so that they can go out there and help people and get paid pretty damn well for it. So, especially if you're in the real estate industry, we, like anybody else, as a consultant, work with anybody, but rob.lesix.com. That's where you can find me. And if you want funny Disney stories, that's the personal social profiles. And you can see how that miserable place that I experienced so much misery being at is actually the happiest place on earth, because my wife and girls love it so much. And, but that's life, right? Like, how do you coexist between a place that you hate and people that you love? You recognize the people that you love. Make it a wonderful place to be.
Wonderful. I just dropped the link to your Facebook here. I'm going to do the same for, you said rob.lee, L-E-E, and S-I-X?
No, lesix.com.
That's what I did wrong. rob.lexus.com. Okay, good. Y'all, I'm going to drop both of these in here. Thank you so much, Robert. So grateful for you. Y'all, thank you so much for joining. I'll be live again tonight at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. And with that, thank you all so much for joining The Knowing Show. And I will see you later today. Have a great day until then.
And thank you, Christine. I love being the center of attention. So thanks for making me the center of people's attention for an hour. It's been a privilege. Thank you.
It's been such a privilege. Thank you. Thank you for the work that you've done to have so much to share. So appreciate you.